They thought humiliating an African leader on the world stage would silence him. In front of powerful nations and a hall filled with world leaders, Ibrahim Traoré was cornered, pressured, and told to apologize. But what unfolded next shook the very walls of the assembly. It was not just a response, it was a roar of defiance, a voice that carried the weight of a continent's struggle against injustice. What happens when a leader refuses to bow, when his words echo the pain and hope of millions? This is the story the world wasn't prepared to hear. Before that unforgettable moment at the UN, Ibrahim Traoré was not just another leader in a suit. He was the symbol of a new wave of African leadership, rising from the soil of struggle, driven by the belief that Africa's destiny must no longer be written by outsiders. Born from a generation that witnessed poverty, exploitation, and broken promises, Traoré carried with him a vision of dignity and freedom. He was not molded by luxury or foreign privilege, but by the cries of his people, by the soil of Burkina Faso, and by the memory of a continent denied its rightful place in the world. He stood not only as a president, but as a voice of resistance. Yet as he stepped onto the global stage, whispers of discontent followed. The world powers were uneasy, for here was a man who dared to challenge the system. And soon, the stage was set for a confrontation that would define not only his leadership, but also Africa's fight for respect. The tension had been building long before the day of the assembly. Traoré had called out the exploitation of African resources, the hypocrisy of international promises, and the shadow of colonial influence that still lingered. His fiery speeches back home had ignited hope in the hearts of millions, but they had also stirred discomfort among the global elite. Pressure mounted. Leaders who once smiled for photographs began to whisper behind closed doors. The media painted him as reckless, as too radical, as dangerous to the carefully balanced world order. And then came the summons, an invitation to the United Nations, framed as diplomacy, but designed as a trap. As he entered that hall, eyes followed him, some with hope, others with disdain. When the moment arrived, the demand was clear: apologize. Apologize for the words that challenged authority, for the defiance that unsettled the status quo, for daring to speak of Africa's right to stand tall. The air was heavy. Some leaders smirked, expecting his silence. Others leaned in, waiting to see if he would bend. Every second stretched, every heartbeat louder. This was no longer just about him. It was about an entire continent watching, holding its breath, waiting to see if their voice would once again be silenced or finally be heard. And then it happened. Traoré did not lower his head, did not whisper an apology. Instead, his eyes burned with fire as he rose to his feet. With steady defiance, he declared that Africa would not be humiliated, that his words were not his own, but the cry of millions who had endured centuries of exploitation. His voice carried across the hall, piercing through arrogance and power, turning silence into shock. He reminded the world that Africa's dignity was not negotiable, that the wealth beneath its soil was not for others to dictate, and that no force on earth could erase the truth. Some gasped, some shifted uncomfortably, but none could ignore him. It was not just a speech, it was an earthquake. In those few minutes, the Hall of the United Nations transformed into a stage of reckoning, and Ibrahim Traoré stood unshaken, a leader unwilling to bow. When his words ended, the silence that followed was louder than any applause. The world expected surrender, but witnessed defiance. That day, Africa's voice was not only heard, but felt. His fiery response spread far beyond the walls of the assembly, sparking conversations, inspiring movements, and reminding millions that unity was power. It was a moment that proved Africa's fight for dignity was not confined to history, but alive in the present. Traoré's stand was more than an act of courage. It was a reminder that leadership is not measured by obedience to power, but by loyalty to people. And as the world reflects on that day, one question lingers. If one leader's voice could shake the UN, what could happen if an entire continent stood together, united and unafraid?